Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Story Time with Kate Mazeris. Today, I'm going to be sharing a blog from my Yoga Off the Mat series called Another Skunk. I hope you enjoy it. This morning, I pulled on a pair of anklet socks with skunks scattered all over them. A Christmas gift from years ago. The socks are a reminder to know my own power as I walk my own path. A lesson, a lifetime in the making. 15 years ago, I lived at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. Up until then, skunks had been a quiet yet consistent presence in my life since I was a child. One of my earliest movie memories is watching A Cry in the Wilderness, in which George Kennedy is sprayed by a rabid skunk and must bathe in a tub filled with tomato juice to rid himself of the noxious odor. From then on, whenever I smelled skunk on the highway, in my neighborhood, in hikes at the park, I was acutely alert to watch out for the black and white creature that could potentially wreak havoc in more ways than one. So when I pulled on the socks this morning, I was reminded of my time living in Big Sur. Skunks often appeared when I was on my way from the gardens at Esalen to the farm on the north side of the property. There was even a mother and her two kits living peacefully beneath my hut. Everyone wanted to rid their living space of these intimidating animals, but I welcomed them. Sitting on the deck, I would watch their little black and white shapes waddle to the hut as the sun rose, tired from their nocturnal adventures. After the sun went down and I went to bed, I could hear Mama and her babies scurrying out in search of grubs and other goodies. One afternoon, I was preparing a sweat lodge with my friend Mateo. We chatted about our animal totems that have revealed the many life lessons we needed to learn and embody. You have some pretty powerful skunk medicine, he quipped. Yeah, I know, I sighed. Mateo lifted his brows. Lots of lessons about self-respect for you this time around. Placing some lavender into the crevices between the rocks we had arranged, I said, and boundaries, and walking alone. He nodded. Knowing most people's reaction to seeing them on campus, I said sadly, but who would want to be with a skunk? Mateo brightened. Another skunk. If you respect you as a skunk does, then you'll eventually attract someone who mirrors that self-respect and clarity. I stood up and dusted my hands on my jeans. I've lived by myself for a long time. I'm used to waiting. I waited so long after my return to Toledo, I gave up around my 47th birthday. Some people think that my having been single my entire life was attributed to my being extremely choosy. But I have high standards, and I've learned to not settle for anything that can't meet me where I am, particularly where men are concerned. So when I met Steve in the spring of 2016, I had no idea he and I would eventually end up together. On paper, we were as opposite as you could imagine. He had been married 3 times, had 4 children, and was in recovery from a lifelong cycle of addiction to a host of substances. He was angry and irritable and fed up with what life had been so far. On the other hand, I was a vegan yoga instructor who was at peace with being alone and living a life of freedom from the constraints of working for anyone but myself, even if that resulted in financial stress and uncertainty. Steve was retired. I had a flexible work schedule, so we often met across the fence between his apartment and my home. I could hear him talking on the phone while I worked in the garden and he worked in his garage, restoring old furniture and cleaning a plethora of fish he had caught all summer long. At first, I didn't like him. He was too rough, too intense, and used a host of profanity so extreme my ears would tingle. He told me later he thought there must be something wrong with me to be single and living alone at my age. We were Snow White and the Huntsman, or Beauty and the Beast, whichever fairy tale fit in the moment. But over time, I got to know Steve better. He invited me to hear him give a lead at an AA meeting, and I went, but only to learn more about what I was getting into, having him living next door. There had been a string of unsavory people in and out of our neighborhood, and I thought it might be a safe way to figure out what I would have to deal with. Steve surprised me with his candor, his honesty, and his enthusiasm in sharing his story. To be sure, he was in early sobriety, but his self-awareness and willingness to learn and grow impressed me. On the way home, we talked about his girls, his nervousness in speaking publicly, and his love of classical music. Yet another surprise. At the time, I had no idea that within a year he would soon become my best friend, my favorite person, and the love of my life, who both adored me and unwittingly pushed me to embody the skunk medicine Matteo had recognized all those years ago. Sometimes, stuck in his old behavior, Steve was cruel to me for no reason and got sprayed with the truth that I wouldn't tolerate his gaslighting. Sometimes I was the stinker and had to learn how to fight fairly by not dredging up a host of grievances. Together, we soldiered through the first few years of our relationship side by side, his first one sober, and my first one ever. It wasn't easy, but it was always worth it. For in Steve, I had found another skunk, another person who was fiercely independent, yet grounded in the knowledge of who he was and what he wanted. I embodied the softer side of Skunk, the peaceful warrior that steps aside for no creature. My unspoken motto has always been, don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you. Steve often went the other way and had to learn to reel in his rabid emotions and reactions to the consequences of what he called the wreckage of his past. Together, we created a relationship that allowed each of us to be free to speak our minds, even if it was difficult. We allowed each other space and time to grow on our own, and the comfort of being in the presence of another person who could provide compassion, understanding, and a ribbon of light, even in the midst of the deepest darkness. It's been nearly 10 months since Steve died, and I find myself remembering the days last year when he was diagnosed, when he started chemotherapy, when he entered hospice care. But I also remember the times we talked for hours about everything, the laughter we shared over a funny story, or Steve enthusiastically river dancing in the living room. I remember the times he held me when I was overwhelmed with things I couldn't control, the times I held him in the weeks before his death, finally able to accept that his human life would soon be complete. In the life that remains without Steve here, I find myself once again revisiting the skunk energy that gives me the courage to walk alone, to accept myself more completely, knowing full well that others may not understand the path I am walking. Still, I feel Steve's spirit with me always, in nature, in songs on the radio that spontaneously arrive when I need him the most. And I am strengthened in the assurance that I will always be given opportunities to trust my instincts and embody the energy that has been quietly teaching me for a lifetime. So when I used to teach yoga to children and we would do animal poses, I would bring beanie babies, to symbolize the animals. And when I would pull out the skunk, the kids would all go, ew. And when I would explain to them that the skunk was one of my favorite animals, they understood when I explained how they're peaceful, that they don't go looking for trouble, that they often teach us how to respect boundaries by respecting them. And so when I was writing this blog, I chose this picture on purpose because while these skunks may look similar, of course, one has a white tail and one has a black one. And I think Steve and I, in our relationship, were both light and dark for each other. But in that exploration of both light and dark, we became more whole and more complete as individuals and as a couple. So what a blessing to find another skunk in this lifetime. He was truly one of a kind. So I hope you enjoyed this blog. Please like it and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it. And until I see you at our next story time, have a wonderful day.